Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. I am Iraida Flores, a Forum Board member, proud Arizona resident, business owner, newly minted permanent U.S. resident. Thank you. Just 2 years ago, I got my green card, and mother of a DACA recipient. Over my career, I have created many thriving businesses, and as an employer, immigrant, and mother, I have long advocated for humane policies that would provide protections for the vulnerable while allowing the workforce American business owners desperately need. While this past week was a blow to Arizona, with the passage of Proposition 314, we have also had moments of victory thanks to our statewide advocacy. I believe with leaders like you, we will continue to seek creative advocacy and policies that allow all in our communities to thrive and feel safe. It's because of this experience and work that I'm excited to introduce our final panel on state activity in immigration reform. As we have seen over the past few years, the interest and involvement of state governments in border security and immigration reform, it's more intense than ever. With that interest and involvement come several questions and concerns, many of which we are going to be addressing here today in this panel. And it is my honor to introduce our panel. First, we have Chief Michael Tupper, who served as Chief of Police for Marshalltown, Iowa, and is a part of our law enforcement immigration task force leadership. Next, we have Reyna Montoya from Arizona, my fellow, the founder and executive director of Aliento, an organization that serves undocumented DACA and mixed immigration status families. Chief Sheriff Sam Casey is the Chief Sheriff for Alexandria, Virginia. And finally, our moderator, Marty Schladen, who is joining us all the way from Ohio, where he writes and reports for the Ohio Journal Capital Journal, right? Did I say it right? Sometimes I get nervous, I don't know why. When I speak without reading, I have to write. But when I'm not reading, I feel more me, you know? And now I feel more safe talking with my green card on hands. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for being here today. When I was honored to be invited to moderate this panel was before the election. Since the election, at least as an old news hound, this is much more newsy than it otherwise would have been. Let's get to it. I think based on some of the public opinion stuff we saw in the last panel, it may be even less likely now that Congress can do much of anything regarding immigration, which means that that power devolves to the state capitals. And we've got people on this panel today who are dealing with the fallout. And so I think it's good to talk from the police standpoint first. Chief Tupper, your city's about 27,000 people, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I covered small town police for a long time early in my career. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what your normal challenges are, what your resources are like.
Yeah, so every police department and sheriff's office in the country right now is hiring. And so for the last 5 years, that's been a constant battle in trying to maintain staffing and having the number of officers that you need to be successful. And so I've been the police chief in Marshalltown, Iowa for the last 13 years, and I have a budgeted strength of 42 police officers. I've been telling my city council for 13 years that we have work for 50 police officers, and now we can't even stay at 42 because of the staffing shortages. So we're a very busy police department. We respond to about 750 to 800 calls for service a week. And we have a little bit of violent crime. We have a lot of drug crime. Resources are tight in our community at all levels, not just in city government, but with all the nonprofits that we work with. And we stay very busy dealing with a lot of difficult social issues in our community. And there's just not enough time or enough people or enough resources in the day to be able to effectively address a lot of the problems that we're dealing with.
And so with, if you could just briefly describe what SF 2340 would do and what its status is and how that might impact your department.
Well, that legislation right now is held up in the federal court, waiting a decision by the federal court whether or not it's lawful to take effect. But if it is allowed to take effect, what it'll do is it'll put local law enforcement, police departments and sheriff's offices in Iowa on the front lines of immigration enforcement. And we will be tasked with enforcing federal immigration law in the state of Iowa. We're a long ways from the border. I don't know if you've looked at a map lately. So, so in Des Moines, Iowa, we're trying to solve the problems of the border through state legislation. And what it's going to do, in essence, is it becomes an unfunded mandate on local police departments and sheriff's offices to enforce federal immigration law, and we're not prepared to do that, and we don't have the resources to do that.
Is that generally held opinion among your other fellow chiefs of police and sheriffs in Iowa?
I think so. I think even police chiefs especially try to stay out of politics, but I think even among the most conservative police chiefs and sheriffs in Iowa, we all have concerns about what this legislation will do and the unfunded mandates that it'll place upon local governments.
So Reyna, I thought maybe you could first of all tell the audience a little bit about your background and then describe some of the recent events in Arizona and how encouraging or discouraging you find them.
Thank you, Marty, and thank you everybody for being here. My name is Reyna Montoya. I am the founder and CEO at Aliento. Aliento translates into breath, but when you give aliento to someone, it's like giving words of encouragement. So I grew up undocumented in the belly of the beast in Arizona, that we were famously known for policies like are trying to pass in Iowa, with that they would technically ask anybody that looks suspicious to be undocumented about their immigration status. So that's something that I don't have to imagine. I was born in Tijuana, Mexico, and at a very young age, we ended up migrating. We had an internal migration from Tijuana to Nogales, just 3 hours south from the border where I grew up. And the reason why we migrated was because my dad was unfortunately a victim of a crime. He was kidnapped, and the kidnapping was by Mexican police. So my dad, like any other dad, made a courageous decision to flee his home country to seek our safety. So without his courageous decision, maybe I wouldn't be standing in front of you here today. After that, I was very lucky to go into university. I graduated with 2 bachelor's degrees and a minor in 4 years from Arizona State University, went on to get a master's degree from Grand Canyon University, and eventually ended up at the Kennedy School with an executive degree from Harvard. So for us, and for me, this is something that is real personal, and when we're talking about Arizona context, there's been a lot of migration. To contextualize it for you all, Phoenix is the 5th largest city in the whole nation. Maricopa County for the past years has been described as the fastest growing population. This is not only the right thing to do to integrate immigrants, that is technically 2 out of 3 immigrants in the state of Arizona nationwide have been living here in the United States for over 10 years of our undocumented or unauthorized population. And that includes dreamers like me. As a DACA recipient, my future is holding by a thread. And the reality is that I was one of the lucky ones. The majority of the undocumented young people that I get to work with, they don't have that certainty. They are completely undocumented. And I was having a lot of hope 2 years ago in 2022. Our students, alongside with the business community, Glenn, who's here, who testified for in-state tuition, and so many allies, non-traditional allies from faith, from business, from education, really came together to put in the hands of the voters something called Prop 308 that technically allow the state of Arizona to have dreamers to pay in-state tuition. So it's not a handout, you still have to pay, but it would give you that opportunity to pay in-state tuition and have that opportunity in the context that, as Pearl from earlier on the panel was mentioning, that we have a labor shortage in the state of Arizona. So all of those things were leading into the right direction, and unfortunately this year, there was something called Prop 314 that passed by the voters. It became a whole tentacle of issues that it had 5 components, including greater penalties for working, criminalizing mothers for maybe providing a social security when they're being asked at hospitals to provide medical care for their children born in the United States. That would potentially lead to a felony. But it was really sold by the Arizona legislature as this was gonna solve the fentanyl crisis. And the description was intellectually dishonest, and it did not provide the whole picture. So definitely I sit here with you with a heavy heart, knowing that our communities are gonna be not only targeted, but also the right hand of Sheriff Joe Arpaio that made Arizona so famous is now the sheriff, and it's threatening to bring back Tent City that created so many human violations. So I know we'll have a little bit more to discuss that, but I think it's important in this community of practice that so many people are coming together from faith background, from business background, that it is imperative that we speak up. Given the past panel, we heard that 2/3 don't believe the rhetoric that it is. So we need to make sure that those voices are loud and clear in these moments.
Thank you, Reyna. Sheriff Casey, you've got a pretty big population that you all police, correct? And it is more difficult, I think, in your eyes than it should be for lawful permanent residents to come work for you. Can you tell us what happened and why you want those people on your force?
Yeah, absolutely, Marty. Thank you for this opportunity today to talk to everybody here about this really important issue. It goes back to what Chief Tupper kind of highlighted. Everyone in law enforcement is hiring right now. We're all understaffed. And in the community that I'm lucky enough to be a law enforcement leader of, it's a very diverse community here in Alexandria. It's right over the bridge, not too far from where we are today. And one of the ways that we build trust in our community is by working with everybody and giving everybody equal opportunity, right? And so what we find is when we're doing a lot of recruiting that there's folks who have their legal permanent resident status and have been in the country for quite some time, but are not citizens yet. And so as a result of that, I am unable to make the decision to hire them as a police officer, as a sheriff's deputy. And the reason why is that there is a state regulatory agency that runs out of the governor's office called Department of Criminal Justice Services, and they would be the ones who have to grant a waiver. And so what we were seeing is that that process was a little onerous in that we would tell people, hey, apply, and then we'll work with you to get a waiver. And that's really, it's disconcerting to them because those folks who are in the process to be citizens, what I've seen is that they've heard it before. They've heard a lot of, well, you just need this, you need that. And it's hard, and they kind of get just a little, they just back away from the process. So what we did, working with Delegate Charnel Herring in Alexandria and the city of Alexandria's legislative liaison, is drafting legislation that would allow local police chiefs and sheriffs in Virginia to hire legal permanent residents who've been in the country for 5 years who are on a pathway to citizenship. To be in these positions. So basically, we would have the authority to make those hiring decisions over the regulatory agency that I mentioned earlier. So we tried it 2 years ago, and we made some progress, but then this past year, we actually made it all the way to the governor's desk, but unfortunately was vetoed. And also, there was also a bill in Virginia that I wasn't involved in, but also would allow Dreamers the opportunity to be law enforcement officers as well. And the governor vetoed that one as well. So I think we really missed an opportunity there to increase the hiring pool of our law enforcement agencies in Virginia. And what was frustrating to me is that this was be a local chief and sheriff decision, right? So why don't you not trust your local chiefs and sheriffs to make these hiring decisions? And there was no onus that chiefs and sheriffs had to hire legal permanent residents. It would be up to the chief and sheriff. So I thought we did a really good job crafting some pretty good legislation, but unfortunately, I think politics got in the way. And I heard a lot of, how can a non-citizen tell a citizen what to do kind of things. And I really found that to be unproductive, and I really don't think it's in the best interest of public safety, to be honest.
Oh, and you mentioned the fact that you want to get your staffing up, but you also said that you've got a very diverse community. Can you talk about how having somebody who might be foreign-born would be valuable to your force in that way?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I see it every day inside the detention center that a lot of my folks work inside of, is that there is a built-in trust when someone looks like you and they're telling, you know, and they're building that bond. It's easier, right? It just is. And that's just the reality, that you automatically go in with some built-in credibility and some understanding about the struggles that you might have had growing up, and this person can relate to those struggles as well. And I've seen it work many, many times over. So it'd be a really, really awesome opportunity, and I've seen it be successful, and I just hope we can expand that successful idea as we move this forward.
Reyna, you come from one of these communities. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what the police mean to, particularly an undocumented community, but also just being a minority, what it means when a police officer comes or you have an encounter with one, and how valuable it might be to have somebody who looks like you.
I really appreciate the comments from the sheriff, because the reality is that the trust has been completely broken. There's been so many undocumented immigrants that didn't record crimes that they were impacted by because of the fear of getting deported. Just to give you a small picture, when I was growing up as a child, and then when I became a teenager and I was coming of age and going to college. College was the farthest that I've ever driven. And we started getting all these text alerts. This was before technology was pretty well defined. This was in the peak of 2010, which it was the SB 1070 era, where we have Sheriff Joe Arpaio doing its workplace raids. We would get text alerts saying, like, on Country Club and Broadway, please avoid it. Police is gonna be there. The sheriffs are gonna be there. So what that meant for someone like me and my mother was to deciding not to go to the groceries. It meant that if it happened on a Sunday, we were not gonna go to church, because we were not gonna risk to getting a deportation proceedings, because typically that's the first interaction that we would get whenever we would come in face with law enforcement. Typically they ask you for your driver's license. We start doing their due diligence, see what they were hired to do, but then that leads into, I don't have one. So then it comes down to, in the state of Arizona, your car can get impounded and you have to pay over $1,000 in order to get it back. So we're starting to see this like ripple effect, and even if you're a victim of a crime, you're not gonna come forward and bring those issues if you know that that could lead to a permanent family separation.
Chief Tupper, first of all, if you would describe your foreign-born population in Marshalltown, whether you feel like your department is closely connected with them enough, and based on what Reyna just said, how does it, protecting these communities serve the overall mission of crime fighting generally?
Yeah. So in Marshalltown, we're just under 28,000 people. Census data says that we're about 25 to 28% Latino. I would tell you it's probably closer to 40%. And we have a growing refugee population from Southeast Asia. So we're a very diverse community. Around 50 languages are spoken in our school district. So there's a very diverse community. What we're seeing is, I'm going to share a quick story. 2016, President Trump was just inaugurated, and I'm not going to turn this political, but this is just the facts. He was just inaugurated. And our police department was summoned to a residential address for a burglary in progress in the middle of the day. Fairly unusual to have that type of crime in the middle of the day. But people saw two, we'll call them suspects, climbing into a window. They forced open a window, climbed into the house. So they called the police. And the police show up, and they quickly determined that there were people inside this house, and the folks wouldn't come outside, and so things kind of escalated a little bit. They're treating it as a burglary in progress. Long story short, it turns out that two people locked themselves out of their own home. climbed in the window to get into their home, and the neighbors didn't realize that these folks lived there, and they called the police. Immigrants. And they were afraid to come to the door because they thought we were there to deport them.
Was there a language barrier?
There was a language barrier.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think we live in a really small world, quite honestly. Okay, and when we go out into the community and talk to people about what they want, we all want the same things. We want safe neighborhoods, safe schools. We want to take care of our families, and in order for local law enforcement to keep your community safe, I just mentioned to you we don't have enough police officers. We need to work closely with the community and build trust in the community. It takes all of us working together in our communities to keep our communities safe. Sir Robert Peel said, "The police are the public, and the public are the police." And that means that we're all in this together, and I'm being paid to be the police chief, but I need your help to keep the community safe. And if you don't trust me, and if you're afraid to call the police, our community, the public safety is diminished in our communities. And so what we see actually is criminals taking advantage of this. And they will tell the domestic violence victim, you can't call the police, because if you do, they're going to deport you. They will, people that will extort money, rob you, they will say, you cannot call the police, because if you do, they will deport you. The safety in our community is now diminished. So we need to find a way to address important issues related to immigration. We need to address problems at the border, no doubt. But we cannot put local law enforcement in the shoes of federal immigration enforcement if we expect to keep our community safe, because it actually does the opposite.
Sheriff Casey, do you find yourself frustrated by congressional inaction on this topic? I mean, ever since I've been a reporter, there's always been reforms get halfway to the goal line and never get across. So you find yourself in the middle.
Yeah, 100%. To go along the lines of what Chief Tupper just described, it absolutely is that this issue has been so politicized that community safety and public safety is diminished, 100%. And I believe strongly that public safety collaboration is paramount, and that at the federal, local, and state level, you have to have that. And if you're missing those pieces, or you're requiring your local agencies to do the federal agencies' jobs and state agencies doing federal jobs, and federal jobs are being done at the state level, you're going to have issues. You're going to have gaps in your public safety, 100%. And that's what we've seen with immigration due to the lack of action by Congress, and kind of clearly laying out where the guidelines are and what the expectations are of localities. And as a result, everyone is just making it up as they go or shifting with the political winds. And then as a result, we as local law enforcement officials are subjected to that, and worse off is the community is subjected to that. And it's not getting us anywhere, and it's not making us any safer.
Chief Tupper called it an unfunded mandate. It's as if, do you believe it's as if you've already got your hands full doing everything you do, and now you've got this huge federal responsibility that could be pushed onto your plate?
100% is that we need more people right now just to do our basic, lawful responsibilities, which are keeping our community safe at the local level by doing what the community expects of us, right? For me, it's making sure that the courthouse is safe. It's making sure the folks in my custody are safe. It's making sure my staff is safe. Making sure that we're aiding and assisting the police department when they need it to make sure the community is safe, and being visible and engaging with folks all throughout our community to build those relationships and build that trust. And by interjecting any type of federal responsibility or authority or expectations on us that really don't fall within our purview is going to absolutely be an unfunded mandate. And it's going to be difficult to accomplish those things that I just outlined.
And Chief, do you worry about, with the new Iowa law, if it becomes enforced, that you just don't know what the legal parameters are, how to keep your people from breaking this, violating some other law?
Yeah, I do worry about that. I also worry about the fact that if the law in Iowa and other states who are doing similar things, if that becomes the law of the land, we could end up having 50 different ways of dealing with immigration in the United States. And every state will do it a little bit different. It's going to be very confusing. In 2020, we had a lot of discussions about social justice and making sure that we're treating people fairly. Do laws like this now open up the doors to racial profiling? Concerns like that? Do I, as the police chief in Marshalltown, Iowa, now have to establish relationships with governments in Mexico and in Central America? Because if we're forced to take people into custody, are we also going to be forced to get them back to their country of origin? It becomes very complicated, and how do you do that? And now local taxpayers are going to be responsible for all of that as well.
For example, how would you justify a suspicion that someone is not in the country legally, except based on how they look or how they talk?
We do not know, and we have not received any direction from the state of Iowa about how this law should be enforced. I don't know if any of you have ever been stopped by the police, but you're typically asked for a driver's license. How many of you have been stopped by the police and you left your license at home, right? And so now you can't prove who you are. And what does an undocumented immigrant really look like? Could look like me, I don't know. So we could end up being forced to take people into custody that we should not be taking into custody, and people's rights are now being violated. And it's being done under color of state law.
And that's not why you went into this profession.
It is definitely not why I went into this profession, and really it's not what any of our local law enforcement officers want to be involved in. We want to help the community, we want to make our community safe, and in order to do that we need to work closely with the community, and laws like this will diminish our relationships in the community.
Reyna, having gone through what you've gone through the last couple of weeks, I wonder if you could tell everybody what it feels like to be you and people who are similarly situated, what you're thinking about now.
As soon as we heard the outcome of the election, I started texting, checking in, calling our students. Majority of the students I work with are between the ages 7 to 24, but the vast majority are between that 16 to 24 age. And a lot of them started telling me that they were afraid. A lot of them came into our office and were sharing that they go to a school that is a school of faith. It's a private institution, and they're definitely the minority. And all the students that look a little brown started getting targeted by their other classmates.
How?
Saying, "Are you ready to get deported? Are you ready for your family to get deported?" In a faith institution. So this is the reality that we're waking up. As I mentioned, I unfortunately don't have to imagine family separation. My dad was detained for 9 months in 2012. And he was detained because he was working. He was helping with the rebuilding of Puerto Rico after a lot of the hurricanes. So they didn't have enough workers. So he went and worked. And when he came back, they asked him if he was a US citizen. That's how he started his deportation process. He was detained for 9 months, where we couldn't hold him, where we couldn't celebrate birthdays. And eventually, that's how we were able to fight for his case. It took him 8 years to fight for his deportation case. 9 months in detention, 8 years before the judge said that he had been granted asylum. And then it took until 2 months ago for him to get his residency. So thankfully, my father right now is a legal permanent resident. But because the story of our migration was because of his kidnapping, and I was older than 21 when he was granted asylum, even though that I was a child when I came here, I couldn't be part of the package. And that means that a lot of our students right now, a lot of our young people are terrified. I also get to work with a lot of US citizen children. In Arizona, there's close to 200,000 US citizen children that are living with an unauthorized parent. They're going through our K-12 classrooms, and they're terrified that they're gonna get targeted because their classmates haven't been taught compassion, and they don't even know their immigration status, and they're threatening that they're gonna get separated. And this is a larger context that we're living in, and when we're hearing about mass deportations, we have seen under the Obama administration that there were 1,000 people that were deporting every day, and not everybody was the so-called criminal. To contextualize it in Arizona, working without the proper documentation, it's already a felony. So I think we have to be very careful when we're having this conversation about the good versus bad, because in reality, there has been laws, like in the state of Arizona, that have criminalized and made it even into a felony for you to work. So I think that it is really critical for us to understand what's at stake, for us to understand that undocumented communities, US citizen children of undocumented parents, if we don't have the right precautions, they can be put into foster care. And that's what my community is waking up. I am waking up to having to not only worry about my future, but if I'm no longer gonna be able to work here legally, then what happens to my nonprofit organization where I get to employ US citizens, right? So the livelihood even of my employees are depending on what happens to programs like DACA.
Do you hope that as the larger Arizona populace wakes up to these realities, there will be a backlash?
That's where I have to hold on my hope, right? I have to hold on my hope that good people of conscience are gonna wake up and they're gonna go beyond their pockets. They're gonna see the reality that immigrants are not only causing harm, but they're really making our communities better. I have to hold on to the hope that people will speak up. I think that there were a lot of folks, I think that I was listening to a podcast and they said that the most Googleable thing after the election was, how can I change my vote? And the unfortunate reality, you can't, right? And despite of the partisanship, I think it's like a lot of folks think that this is just campaign talk, but in Arizona, we have lived it. We have seen how our economy completely was depleted, how businesses had to be closed, how we lost millions of dollars because people would boycott us and they wouldn't come to the state. We also lost millions of dollars in investment from companies that they felt that it was too hard because it wasn't only undocumented immigrants who were getting apprehended. It was US citizens that were being apprehended by law enforcement because they didn't have the proper training. That's not what law enforcement was hired to do. That's not, as we heard it from our panelists, that's why they were called to serve. And right now, we are putting law enforcement in an incredible tough situation, and with Proposition 314, now it's an unfunded mandate. We are a $1 billion deficit in the state of Arizona, and we're only shooting ourselves in the foot because taxpayers are gonna have to pay for the cost of this harmful and hateful rhetoric and policies.
Chief Tupper, we've only got a couple of minutes left, I think. But I wanted to ask, with the Iowa bill, it's stuck in the courts. There's a reasonable chance the courts will never let it be enforced. But is it already having an effect? Do you think it's intimidating immigrant communities? And if you want to comment, do you think that was the intent all along?
Yeah, I think the damage has already been done because the conversation has already been had. And people pay attention to the headlines, but they rarely follow up on the final results. And even if the federal courts strike down the Iowa law, people in my community already think it exists, and those kind of conversations are already going to continue. And I'm not a politician. I was not involved with the writing of this law, but my belief is that the Iowa legislature and Governor Kim Reynolds never expected this law would actually even take effect. I think it was presidential campaign year politics as usual, and it was designed to rile up the base. And again, I'm not a politician, and I try to stay out of politics, but I don't think that this law was ever intended to take effect. But it might, and now if it does, we have a really difficult challenge. And we're already asking our law enforcement officers in this country to do too much. Most of my job has nothing to do with law enforcement as it is, and this is, again, just another unfunded mandate that local law enforcement shouldn't be involved with.
Sheriff Casey, you mentioned earlier that Alexandria is very diverse, which is completely unsurprising to anybody in this room. Are you hearing from immigrant communities who are saying they feel scared? And if you do, what do you tell those people?
Yeah, Marty, I'm already starting to hear that. I'm hearing it, in the schools. I'm hearing it from my children who go to school, who are telling me what the kids are saying. I'm hearing it from adults.
What are your kids hearing that other kids are saying?
Well, it's their friends who are saying, "Am I going to get deported? Am I going to be able to stay here? What's going to happen to me now? What's going to happen to my family?" And kids are crying. They're upset. It's very, very sad. And I don't have the answers for my children. And it's hard. It's really, really hard. And adults are asking the same questions now. Everyone is on edge. Everyone is nervous. And so the best thing that I can do in my position is to ensure folks that I'm going to continue to do what I need to do to keep the community safe in the most fair and transparent way possible, and making sure that I'm doing it with empathy and compassion and making sure I'm thinking of everyone when I do that.
Chief, do you have to buck people up and assuage fears?
Yeah, fairly consistently. And since the election, there's been a lot of discussion in our community about what's going to happen and fears of mass deportations and how that might affect our local community. And so we're trying to make sure that everybody understands, first of all, from a law enforcement perspective, I work for you. Doesn't matter where you come from, doesn't matter demographics. I work for you, I'm here to serve you, help you, and we need your help. We're trying to make sure that people have factual information. Just because it's on the internet doesn't mean it's true, right? So just because you read it on Facebook doesn't mean it's true. So we're trying to make sure people have accurate information about what's happening and what's not happening, and enforcing sharing positive messages. So I don't think many people have stopped to think about what happens to our local economies if some of these policies are put into place, but I know it would be devastating to our local schools and our local economy. And it's going to have a negative effect no matter what, because people think this law is going into effect, or they fear that it might someday. So what if people leave? What if people leave our community? It's going to have a negative effect no matter what.
Reyna, in 30 seconds, can you take us out on a message of hope?
The hope is on you. And the question is simple. What are you willing to do to protect immigrants in this moment? It's quite simple.